Hello and welcome to Future Commerce, the podcast at the intersection of culture and commerce. I'm Phillip,
And I'm Brian.
and achievement unlocked. This is the first time I'm doing a podcast with strep or whatever. I'll get officially diagnosed tomorrow, but if you're watching on the live stream, every time I swallow, I will make a face. You can see it yourself. And my fresh haircut at .com/future commerce media. Still haven't bagged Future Commerce over there, but we're Future Commerce everywhere else. Go give us a follow. Does my voice sound weird today?
It sounds
Feels
pretty
weird.
good. I think you're doing well. You're doing well.
We're doing a little bit of an after dark here. We haven't done one of these in the evening in a long time, but we got a lot to
No.
cover today. Brian, we are, I think, at when our listening audience and our watching audience over at YouTube are finally getting a hold of this episode. It'll be about 4.5, 5 weeks from our monumental event, our momentous occasion. Of course, that's Muses. That's happening live at Art Basel, December 6th, 7th, and 8th. We want to see you there. People from all over the e-commerce and retail ecosystem are coming to Art Basel to turn this into an e-commerce and technology event. I see it happening the last 3 years we've been there. This will be our third year activating at Art Basel. Brian, are you pumped?
I'm pumped.
Yeah, got an incredible opening party on the 6th. We have Commerce Conversations happening on the 7th, which is a networking event for folks in the e-commerce and retail ecosystem. And that's Commerce Conversations brought to you by Absolute Web. And of course, the exhibition will be active all 3 days. We have 9 incredible artists and 10 amazing installations. We're going to bring you a literal manifestation of art and commerce. This is where commerce and art converge, is at Art Basel, and Future Commerce is going to be unveiling our brand new journal for the year, December 6th, 7th, and 8th. Come on down to Miami Beach. Book it now. Go to futurecommerce.com/muses. And any other thoughts about that, Brian?
I'm pumped.
No? Okay,
I'm
good.
just
We're
gonna keep
pumped.
saying that.
We're just going to keep saying we're pumped. What have you been up to recently? We've had a lot of salon events. Q4 is kicking
Yes.
up in a big way for us.
Yeah. We've got some really cool salons going on. It's been all over the country. Seattle, New York, LA. We're gonna be in Austin. It's pretty exciting times. We're doing a lot, and that's all leading up to Muses. So it's been a whirlwind of a Q4 already. I can't even believe how whirlwindy it has been.
And if you have yet to come to one of our salon events, these are a private dinner series that we host where we have conversation with retail and e-commerce leaders talking about the future of commerce. If you have yet to get out to one of those, the easiest way to do that is to go and subscribe to Future Commerce. It's free. For now, futurecommerce.com/subscribe and get on the list. Make sure you give us a little information about yourself, including your company name, your title over there. We've had incredible brands the last few weeks at these salon events in New York. I think we had Chanel and Diptyque. We had Cravat. We had, wow.
DVF,
Yeah, Diane Van Furstenberg. Incredible stuff happening over
just
there.
very fun conversations, things that you're not going to get to talk about in many other contexts,
It's true.
and people you're going to meet that you wouldn't meet elsewhere. And honestly, food and wine you probably won't have
True.
very often. So it's
Where are you heading this week? Where you're going to?
LA, Austin, Miami in the
Woo!
over the next week and a half, if that.
Week and a
Not even
half.
that. Yeah,
I'll
less
see
than
you.
that. Like a week.
You'll be
Over
down
the
here.
next week.
Yeah. And what's the venue in LA? Where are you
Yeah,
heading?
Citrine. It's a one Michelin star restaurant in Santa Monica, and it looks incredible. The wine
Looks incredible.
lineup is insane. I think
Brian,
if they
give us a little taste of what's on the docket.
yeah,
Whet our palates. I can't
yeah.
swallow, but whet my palate.
You could always sip and spit.
I shan't. I don't think I'd do that even without strep. Not anymore. But once upon a
I
time I
think
might have.
oh yeah, once upon a time, yeah. Little tiny taste. We'll be drinking some top ranked Syrah from
Ooh.
California. We'll be drinking wines from 85, I think 83, from
Ooh.
67. Different, yeah.
67. Do we have the budget for that, Brian?
I guess so.
We're a bootstrapped and nearly profitable business. I used to say profitable, but these salon dinners, I don't know.
That was
If you do
back.
want to have the time of your life, you got to get out to dinner with Brian Lang. Brian, you are a host like no other. I'm always impressed. You have an incredible way of hosting an amazing dinner party. And also, I truly thought that I would hate hearing someone read French poetry to kick off a dinner, but you
I mean,
somehow you endeared me
I
to
I
it. I
I
I,
love
I love
this
your readings.
because I've never actually read French poetry at one of these. But
Well,
you've said
Honoré
it
de
like 20
Balzac.
times. Yes, it is. I definitely read a little Balzac, and it's
I'd say
pretty
you come
cool.
strong with the Balzac at our
Like,
dinners,
I
but
do. I brought it
that's me.
more than once.
He's a French novelist. It counts. Okay, let's get into the show a little bit here. We have a couple news items. Of course, later on in the show, you're sitting down with Kris and you're talking about some really rad stuff. I wasn't there. I probably, just given my state, shouldn't be here right now. But give us a few minutes, and we'll get into the rest of the episode with Kris. Kris is always great.
Chris is diving into the collapse of Convoy, which
Got it.
and the rest of the sort of shipping layoffs and what it all means for the industry. It's pretty crazy.
You can't really have e-commerce without logistics, and so that's where I think that you're going to have there's a lot of shakeups happening in the world right now, and I think the it's funny, for 2.5 3 years now I've heard people say the party's over, but the economy keeps trucking along. In fact, the economy is trucking along at such a rate it continues to baffle folks. We had an incredibly strong uh, consumer spending report most recently that showed a 0.7% a year over year growth, which does show a slowing in the consumer, but we haven't seen the inversion just yet.
Yeah, we get into that a little bit in the interview, and that's
Okay.
I think that's what's no, and I think you're dead on. I think that's actually the weird contrast that we're seeing right now, and Chris sheds some incredible light on why we're seeing what we're seeing in that industry versus sort of the strength that we're seeing in retail. Although there are changes in retail, that's the interesting thing, and so definitely stick
Mm.
around for that interview. Chris is just a brilliant mind and has probably provided us with more insight on shipping than we've ever provided anyone. So it's very,
That's
very
for
cool
sure.
to have him back on.
That's for sure. Shipping our jobs typically in the e-commerce and like marketing space, like it's over. That's an ops problem after they click the complete purchase.
But
Once
it
you pay for
should
the
it
product,
be is
but
the
it shouldn't be.
question.
Shouldn't be. Shouldn't be. We've done the CS dance and logistics conversation at least once or twice with all of our partners over the years.
Yes.
I know it shouldn't be, but it's funny. That's how many marketers treat it these days. Anyway, we'll get into that in just a little bit. Speaking of giving up on e-commerce, Home Goods has given up on e-commerce after just 25 months. Home Goods has announced that they are giving up on online shopping to focus on their physical stores. And
Is
at the
that
same time, Rite Aid is giving up on their physical stores to to focus on
on
reorganizing their monumental amount of debt. But some things aren't looking so bright in certain sectors of the economy. Obviously, TJX and Co. These are retailers that do really well
this is
during economic swing cycles. So I find this an interesting retrenching back to doing what you do best.
yeah, it is really interesting for home goods. You'd think that there would be more focus on home
Mm.
goods and maybe that they're just like they're having trouble like just keeping their stores going and keeping them stocked and keeping them focused. But you're dead on. Like they're a discount retailer. It seems like they would be cleaning up right now in a time where people might be withholding back on cash or maybe just not spending quite as much or forced to make cuts. Usually they may buy down. And so it seems like home goods would be able to refocus on digital. But the thing is, digital is hard and it's
Well,
expensive. And
can I interject a hot take here?
yeah,
Let me
yeah,
give you a
hot
hot
take it.
take. I tried to start some beef with Jason Goldberg, who I would say is a friend of the pod, but I'm gonna officially announce that Jason and Scott are now frenemies of the pod. That's what I'm gonna say. I
We
tried to
had
start a beef
Jason
with Jason over this.
at one of our salons recently.
In Boston? Yeah, I
Yeah,
know, I know.
he
And
had a lot of good things to say. It
he's
was a
the
lot of
one.
fun.
No, I like Jason a lot. Frenemy of the pod though would make a great merch T-shirt. What I really need is I wanted someone to start an argument about this because he tended to saddle it in this is what happens when you make boring when you make an exciting brand boring through e-commerce. And my argument was, by nature of you saying that, right, or effectively having said that, but not having really said that, should they have been more daring in their e-commerce? Should they have taken a completely different approach? And this is my hot take. My hot take is maybe the thing that people are looking for is the feeling of the brand and not necessarily the experience of buying. And what they really need is home goods is like a little bit of a gamble. You're going there for an experience. So maybe what they needed was more like a video game and more of a exploratory experience that was a lot less like the Shopify website type thing, the salesforce.com of it all. And we don't need the top rail and we don't need the left filters and we don't need the grid and the responsive web design. What we needed was something drastically different from that. And nobody had the courage to, rather than, how long do you think this e-commerce site took to build, to contract, to build, and to launch, only to be torn down in 25 months? If someone had the courage to do a drastic overcorrection in e-commerce experience that looked a lot more like a Roblox than it did a website, maybe they could have set a trend and had a deeper level of engagement with at least some sort of customer. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's my hot
Yeah,
take.
no, it's an interesting take is go after the like a more fanatical base that's spread across the country as opposed to try
Maybe, yeah.
and compete with other online discount stores, which is really just done through like comparison shopping feeds these days. Like if someone
Exactly
wants to
right,
go
yeah.
do a hunt for an object, they're that kind of a shopper. They're probably not going to do it on home goods. They're going to wait for home goods to show up in some deal news site, dealnews.com or slickdeals.net. And they're going to wait for it to get fed to the homepage or be a 5-star deal. And then they're going to click buy. They're going to immediately click buy. But the just going to some clicking and scroll search
The doom
classic
scrolling,
experience, doom
as you
scrolling
like
on home
to
goods.
point
They can
out,
do
yeah.
that on Amazon or Walmart. Like the doom scrolling is, we've already got
It's
two
so much
places
more
to do
fun to
that.
doom scroll on Amazon than it is on homegoods.com, I'll tell you that. The
Yeah.
other,
Is it? I don't know.
I
I
don't
don't
know,
like I
probably
don't like
not,
doom
but
scroll shopping.
it sounded good when I said it.
I guess
I do
some
think
people love the doom scroll shop like it's Sense Essence or something like that. It's a site that's if you find a steal, it is so unbelievable to you that you're like, this is really high end stuff for a really good
mhm,
price, as
yeah.
opposed to just cheap stuff for cheaper prices, which is a
Well, you can get that from
totally
Temu.
different.
So
Yeah,
this is some really
Temu's the
interesting
good
things that
example.
are happening right now. I spoke about this a couple years ago when I did a piece of research for Right Point about the growing prevalence of Chinese marketplaces and how customers are exhibiting sampling behavior.
Hmm.
They're willing to take a chance on something like a Wish.com, or at the time it was Pinduoduo, or Shein was on the come up. It wasn't what it is now 2.5, 3 years ago when I was writing these reports. And what I was looking at is the sampling behavior comes with the prevalence of installing an app. So, first of all, it wasn't just a website, it was something a little deeper than that. And so, there were these experiences and like design aesthetics that you could get through an app that you just could not get through a simple website. Now, that's like, there's a little bit of a maximalism trend in those design aesthetics of these app-based shopping things. There's like spend to win. Like everything's very like dopamine-centric, and it is preying on your, like, I'm gonna gamble a little bit. I'm gonna spend a little money and see if this is worth it. And sometimes the thing that is worth having spent the time is the dopamine and not the product that you got at the end. And
Or
it's funny, it seems to be working.
cent t-shirts that in Temu, it's
Right.
that's like
Well,
the
it's working, right? So there was
yeah.
a report out recently that shows from SimilarWeb that Temu's shopping traffic is starting to creep up on Walmart.com's shopping traffic. So pure internet traffic that's heading to Temu is Temu.com, which for those who aren't hip, launched right around, I think, the Super Bowl, less than a year of doing business here in the United States as they've been scaling up their operations. They're in a heated race and looking to overtake Walmart and its .com properties. And I think that's a really interesting. Now, first of all, I'm like very cynical that actually translates to any measurable dollar amount that would displace money that would be spent at a Walmart online, it is most likely discretionary and it's displacing
It's
other
also like
purchases,
really
right?
low dollar value purchases. Someone's not going to buy something they feel like they
Yeah.
might want to return on Temu. Like they might buy something they feel I might return at Walmart. In fact, Walmart sells some pretty high ticket items, but there's it's a lot safer because almost everyone has a Walmart near them at some level,
Yeah.
and it just feels like they could take a big bulky or expensive item into the store and do a return.
Yeah.
A
Have you
low
shopped on
AOV.
any of these? Have you shopped on a have you or your wife or anyone shopped on
Talked
or
to people about Temu. I haven't actually shopped on Temu myself. I like this is gonna sound insane, but I feel like I have to draw a line somewhere. like,
that no,
uh,
I get that. Yeah.
yeah, I know I buy from Walmart sometimes.
There's
I
nothing wrong with
do.
that.
No, there's nothing wrong with that.
I told you this was my year of Walmart, right?
It
I told
is
you I
your
took my
Walmart.
daughter
Yeah,
there
it's
on
your
her
Walmart. Yeah.
birthday.
So I feel
Yeah.
like I'm definitely
It
like
was like her
I'm a
birthday
hypocrite.
wish.
I'm a hypocrite. There's no question. I'm
I don't
buying
think
from
there's anything
Walmart,
wrong
but
with
not
shopping at
from
Walmart.
Temu.
I understand drawing the line at
One
Temu
more
is
point about that. I think this is
yeah.
really interesting. Temu and Shein, I think they've done really well with like clothing. Obviously,
Mm,
that's been their whole thing. People are a lot more willing to take a gamble on something like clothing that they don't have to rely on. It might not look great, but it's not something that they're not putting it in their body. They're not putting it like really. It's not like rubbing it into their skin either. It's like something that they're buying and they're wearing. It's the whole in on
in
around
you,
thing.
yeah. In you, on you, around you. Yeah.
And
Which
so
we
stuff
reference a lot.
but on top of that, I think it's also all of the other stuff. If you go buy an e-bike from Temu, you're taking a pretty big risk because it might break down or break on you really easily, and you might not. It might be
Could.
really hard to fix. Um, so it works in certain categories. That's what I'm getting at. Like for certain categories, something like that is going to do really well.
I'm sure it will. I guess coming back to the thing I'm trying to say is that the experience that you get on Temu is what home goods should have is a little more daring. And
Yeah.
it's now it can't compete on price alone. Temu and Shein and a bunch of others are of a different breed in experiential and dopamine
Yes.
centric site design,
Yes.
which is what you get by shopping physically at a home goods, is that there's a little bit of a level of immersion that you would never get through a box based the web box model, which I
Totally.
think is fundamentally played out and dead and broken. We need more daring. And I don't buy into the I'm going to give you a totally different way of thinking about this. But perhaps the home goods shopping experience should have come through more of a mobile app, mobile game. So a good example would be I don't want to out my wife, but she since the pandemic, we've taken to spending a couple hours before bed on the couch. After the kids go to sleep, we're spending a couple hours and sometimes we second screen. Sometimes I read, sometimes we'll talk, but sometimes we second screen. And when we second screen, Brian, she's playing a game called Gardenscapes or Wildscapes. Have you heard of this? Do you know what
I've heard of it. I
Gardenscapes
think I've
is?
only heard of it because of Jackie.
Yeah. Gardenscapes is probably exactly what you think. If you remember Farmville
Yeah,
or
it's like
anything like
Farmville,
that,
but
it's
gardens. Got it.
yeah, but modernized and the graphics are it's shockingly good as far as like mobile games go. It's wildly popular. I feel like they should have had a Homescapes. Like Home Goods should have done a digital goods centric. I'm pretty sure my wife has spent some money on buying digital goods for her digital garden. There's a story in there somewhere. Anyway, I feel like they lacked conviction. They should have done something more daring. That's why they failed. That's
Mm.
my hot take that we spent
Well,
21 minutes talking about.
because of
Every word is
Timu.
excruciating. I must believe in this to have drawn this out for 20 minutes. I'm just saying.
Totally. And on the lines of a Chinese company coming and providing an incredible e-commerce experience, how do you feel about the recent live stream, like just mayhem that we've seen floating around the internet
Oh my
recently? That
gosh.
you called it the equivalent of a hot dog eating contest.
Can you AM radio play by play the video? We'll post it in the show notes, but give
You
me
hate my
what is
play
this
by
video?
plays, but the video is a woman who's flying through items that she's check out this item, check out this item, like practically like throwing it off the screen. She might as well be throwing it back over her head. It's like the show off an item, you should buy it now. Go. And like, I've never I think I've seen a couple other videos like this isn't the only one floating around, where sort of the live stream mayhem happening in China is like, just it's something that I can't really I don't feel like I would never buy from. Like, that's maybe that's wrong, but I don't get it. I
According to thought leaders on Twitter, you will.
like
That's that is what I keep being told, and I refuse to believe. If that makes me an old man, then I guess so
maybe I'm
be it.
just
I
slow at processing information. It's like,
Anybody can process any information at this speed. I But the crazy thing is that she has these like flat Hermes style orange boxes that are being handed to her from off the screen. She flips the lid off, shows you what's in the box, and then chucks the box and the lid off screen. And it's happening so fast. Yes, I said this is if this is live stream shopping, it's the hot dog eating contest version of live stream shopping. Uh,
how many can you get down your
yeah,
wallet as fast as possible?
exactly. Yeah, your wallet. Yeah, instead of your gullet, it's how can you get down your wallet? The issue that I have with this is it's a hyper expressed form of capitalism. And which makes me love how, like, crazy and distorted it is, makes me wanna make fun of it. There's obviously a place for it. I don't think people would be doing this or, like, working on this skill that she has a skill. She also obviously has a team of people off screen handing her stuff and catching it when she throws it. It's
I mean, you
entertaining.
don't know if they're catching it, but you definitely know that they're handing it to her.
I cannot see how anyone wants to buy like this, but it is entertaining. I do think that this is a one weird if Darwinian evolution can come up with anglerfish and the dodo bird, why not capitalism come up with box lady? I have no problem with that.
Box lady is the dodo of
Yeah,
commerce.
it's the dodo of commerce. But I do think that it is misplaced or like misguided to say that this is the future of shopping. I actually think that
Certainly
we're
not the
going to
style.
see but let's think about things in like overcorrection. Uh,
Yeah.
we I had this great opportunity to go and speak at Parsons and to the graduate fashion program and with our friend Heatha Herzog, who a longtime friend. I've known her for 18, 19 years. And she's a professor over there, and invited me to come in and speak about some of these design trends, things that I've been thinking about. And in the multiplayer brand, what we talk about is the power that customers have over brands. And one of those things is, yeah, I asked you before I went and did this talk, what is the most multiplayer brand on earth right now? And it had come up before at our Boston salon. I think Shein is the most multiplayer brand. Why? Because they only produce the things that customers tell them they want. So
Yes.
they're just in time manufacturing, their operating model is specifically designed in the same way, Brian, that software engineering created an operating model around Scrum and sprints, right? Where you have an agile process that allows you to only make a certain set of features at a time and only focus on those and then move on to the next thing. This is a new operating model for a certain type of a retail business that is fundamentally multiplayer. So I'm sharing this at Parsons. And they're all graduate students in a fashion program, so they super jamming on this idea. But in that talk, I'm also talking about how design trends tend to converge, right? And overcorrections eventually become the norm. So a good example is I use in the slide deck is how the Pontiac Aztec in 2001 was seen as like one of the ugliest vehicles that had ever been designed. Do you remember this? Do you remember the Pontiac Aztec and
Oh,
the
we've
silhouette?
referenced the Pontiac Aztec on the podcast before because I've referenced the 30 Rock episode about it a million times.
Oh, that's true. Oh, and it was always seen as such like an ugly piece of design too, that Walter White in Breaking Bad drives a Pontiac Aztec because you want to feel sorry for him. That they want you to feel like what a sad sack of potatoes this guy. He drives the world's ugliest car too. Um, he's tragically unhip. And But then you put so in the presentation, then I also put it right next to a crossover SUV from BMW today, and they are functionally identical cars, the same silhouette. And it took 22 years for that to happen. But this overcorrection in design that looked really outlandish at the time was a countercultural design choice, became the culture. This actually happens a lot,
Yeah.
is overcorrections in design breed a lot of innovation and copycats come along and then that becomes the trend. And that is I think what we're seeing and what we hope to see actually in a lot of these in a lot of design, especially in like website design. I think we're finally breaking out of the mold. And I think that's where what we really need is we'll see overcorrections like this live stream that's crazy. Eventually, I don't think everything looks like the live stream. I think they look countercultural to this. It's anything that evokes some sort of feeling, but not necessarily disgust. So I
Yeah.
think we
Yeah.
converge somewhere in some happy medium that is somewhat live and somewhat interactive and somewhat immersive and not a static website. But I don't know if it looks like anything we actually have today. I don't know.
Yeah, Amazon just introduced the shop or share with your friend or shop run by your friend feature. I forget what they called it, but basically you can get a live look at what your friend might think of a purchase you're looking at mm,
Yeah.
in the app. And I think that, like you said, opportunities for people to come together to share their voices as a group and do it in like a way that might evoke some sort of response or emotion. And who better to provide that than friends or people that you are influenced by for real, not some random person chucking stuff on the internet. That
Yeah.
seems like, at least um for the American audience, that seems like it would probably fit a little bit better, but who knows? Like, I am I know that I don't necessarily fit the mold of every shopper out there, and some
Yeah.
people
That's for sure.
shop. Yeah, that is for sure. Maybe everything will swing in my direction, Philip. That would be wild.
You're the archetype
The
of
next
the future
generation of
consumer.
shopper.
That's funny. God bless. That would be something else. I think as we're looking at the future of commerce, there's other new impacts too. Is we've seen a tightening labor market, right? So we have a number of labor movements over the last couple of years. I wrote an article back in 2021 for Future Commerce Insiders called Brinkmanship, and I think that that was a bit of a bellwether. It was centered around the Starbucks stores that were trying to unionize at the time. It seemed like that was just the tip of the iceberg. Of course, now we're in the middle of the largest auto strike in our generation, and we're in the middle of SAG-AFTRA still striking today. I think that's the longest in history strike. So labor is having a moment. And so Amazon reading the room is getting out ahead of that labor movement that's been coming its way for a long time. And they are trialing humanoid robots to, according to the BBC News report, quote, free up staff.
I think
So
it's because they have a hard time keeping people in their warehouses sometimes. It's a pretty wild environment there, and I think robots and software are not always bug free. They do cause you trouble, but it's a different kind of trouble than humans. And so it's a
yeah.
lot easier to be predictable with robots and software, and it seems like that's always been Amazon's whole goal, is to be as predictable as possible as they
But
increase in
isn't that
speed.
this isn't new, right?
Yeah.
Amazon has had
Oh, yeah.
robots and automation in its warehouse forever.
Yes.
I remember 15 years ago seeing a video of their like how the robots that move racks around
Oh,
and bring robots, I think is the thing that scares people. The fact that it's humanoid and it has like a head with
yeah.
eyes, glowing eyes and like arms, like limbs and backwards knees. That's the thing that I think scaring people
This is
here.
like Flight of the Concords, the humans are dead stuff.
It's yeah, they they poison. Yeah, anyway, we'll keep it clean today on the podcast. But who better to talk about the way that so this is how Amazon is going to, to free up their own issues in their logistics and the growing demands of being more highly available, more consistent for more customers. Not everybody's going to have the ability to deploy robots at scale or even trial them. And that actually, I think, might be a great segue. Brian, Let's get to our conversation with Kris Gosser. What do you say?
Love it. Let's go. Time to
Yeah.
talk to Chris. Today I have with me Kris Gosser, CMO at Shipium. Super excited to have you back on the show, Chris. Lots to talk about.
Yes, thanks for having me back.
And Chris, just for those who haven't heard prior episodes with you on before, maybe just give a quick update on who you are, who Shipium is.
Sure, yes. So I'm the CMO at Shipium. I've had the good fortune of being here since pretty much the very start, joining technical co-founders Jason Murray and Mac Brown, longtime Amazon vets, where Shipium basically takes a lot of the operational software that powered Amazon's stack and trying to bring it to everyone else who's on Amazon.
Yeah, and y'all are very good at that. And I have to add, that you've just been an incredible voice, both behind the scenes for Future Commerce and publicly for what's happening in the shipping world. I feel like your thoughts on that are second to none. And so I'm really excited to chat with you right now because we are in a weird moment in the world of shipping and logistics. And we just saw Convoy shutter fully, and there's been a whole bunch of others that have also cut back. Give us the state of the state. What's the body count right now?
Yeah. So I think for the audience, we'll bring you through three different topics. One is just what's happening, try to bring people up to speed with a lot of movement lately. And then the second is how did it actually happen? So, what confluence of events has led to the current state of the logistics industry? And then Brian and I will pontificate on what this means potentially for the future of commerce, whether it's e commerce or retail or 3PLs or whatever. But yeah, like you said, if it bleeds, it leads. And the body count right now is not good. What we've seen is a massive contraction in what I would call this kind of tech forward or tech enabled logistics industry. So you had Flexport, which was the main story for quite a while. But from a numbers point of view,
Yeah.
it was 20% layoffs earlier this year, then 30%, then another 20%. And their team size has really cratered. 33% of Flexi, 15% of Freight OS, Cart.com did 20%, ShipBob 7%, and then certainly Convoy, the big story of this week, an extremely talented and important startup in the Seattle tech scene went from 1,500 to 500 to zero in a pretty short time frame with a complete shutdown. So, net is that like layoffs are not a new story. This isn't necessarily the novel point to communicate on this particular episode. Is look at this particular area that's doing layoffs because there's been layoffs everywhere. There's a bit of a mini SaaS recession going on. Retail itself is having a rough time. In general, we have just seen a contraction of labor, of investments, of budget, of all kinds of stuff. But there's a very specific nuance that's happening in the logistics world that matters to the commerce industry. And that's what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, and I think this is the key stat. You nailed it. Layoffs happen all the time. This is not unusual. There are ebbs and flows to this sort of world that we're in. The interesting thing is retail is not in a particularly bad spot at the moment. Like at least in the moment. But,
Ever last quarter, all the numbers of Q3 was fantastic, and Q4 is
right.
going to be better because consumers have a lot of money that they're so willing to spend. So retail is actually doing fine, which is weird.
Why now for all of this like shipping wildness, all these shipping companies all at once? I think that's the part that's pretty crazy is that it was not just one of these, like there wasn't like the market picking a winner. It was like, oh, all of these companies have to
Yeah.
scale back. Why was this?
Dan Lewis, the founder of Convoy, and his leadership team have been telling people that the markets just crushed him. And that's exactly what it was. It's completely true. And it's the same thing across the board, whether it's Flexport or Flexi or anybody else. And so let's break that apart just a little bit. So, the way to think about what happened in the 2010s is in many ways, it just comes back to finance, right? Follow the money.
Hmm.
And you had an era of free money, which some people call ZERP. I know Phillip loves that term. And you could certainly describe that the particular strategies and investments during a ZERP era became pretty ubiquitous across every industry. And logistics was the same. And what ended up happening is a lot of startups had this particular strategy that If you could take an enormous amount of investments, probably venture based, but certainly private equity flooded into a lot of older companies too. But if you could take a lot of capital because capital's free, you could essentially invest that capital into upfront or fixed costs, aka software tech, right? It requires an enormous amount of R&D, which requires an enormous amount of money. But in this industry of logistics, supply chain, fulfillment, so on and so forth, whatever you want to call it, the general idea was spread those upfront fixed investments across an operating model that would yield some sort of efficiency or better margin that in the long run would make it the much better option in that particular market relative to incumbents that have been around 10, 20, 50, 80 years, right? That was the general premise. So you saw it across all pieces of the supply chain. Flexport is essentially container freight forwarding to bring imports here and exports there. Convoy was essentially tendering of truckloads, like a freight broker concept that's not novel, but the technology that Convoy had in their mind and how to disrupt the industry was definitely novel, but it took a lot of investment.
Yeah.
Companies like ShipBob or Deliverr, which was acquired by the Shopify fulfillment network, those were 3PLs, warehousing, things like that, that had enormous amount of upfront R&D capital investments. And the list goes on, Flexi, so on and so forth. That was fine. One way to summarize it is that tech-enabled logistics was a fun party while the party was happening.
Yep.
But really, this is a story of the Fed. And when rates were increased, and you saw every industry from banking to telecoms to consumer electronics to whatever, right? That impact is so foundational and central that it shook through every system out there. In this particular system, what it meant was that the music stopped for getting that capital to invest into the enormous upfront R&D that was needed. This was bad. Now, what that meant, though, on the other half of the coin, was the way in which all of these tech-enabled logistics companies made money. And the way to think about it is that they did not make money because of their tech. They made money because they're in the logistics industry.
Mm.
So
Same
fundamentally,
old model, basically.
exactly. Yeah, the same old model by which you make money was still the same old model. So Flexport takes a cut of a container that's traveling from Southeast Asia to LAX, right? So they are at the whims of the supply and demand of what's going to happen in the container industry. And when those went really high at the beginning of COVID, Flexport was on a rocket ship. Now that they have cratered, it doesn't matter how good the tech is or the talent of the team that was there, of which it was an extremely talented team, that they're not immune to the challenges of the way in which they make money.
Yeah.
Same with Convoy. They essentially took a cut of tendering FTL or LTL truckloads and over the road and things like that. That's a supply and demand market as any. And if you're primarily making money based off of that, no matter how good the tech was, it was top tier here in the Seattle ecosystem, and no matter
Yeah.
the talent, which Dan did an incredible job hiring really good people, you are not immune to the cratering of pricing and all that kind of stuff. So when they say
Interesting.
the market's crushed them, that's what it is, right? Same story for cart.com, ShipBob, all the 3PLs are having a tough time right now. And that's really the story is they are not software companies selling their software. They are
Mm.
logistics companies selling logistics that happens to be tech enabled.
They got too verticalized. Like maybe they should have sold software to the logistics industry as opposed to
A lot of them are definitely
combining
getting
two.
wise to that because
Yeah.
when you look at, say, Ship Hero and ShipBob and Stored and all these tech-enabled 3PLs that came out in the last 5-ish years, they're all now trying to sell their software to each other because I think they all see it coming that they've invested the R&D into this. Frankly, some of them have pretty darn good tech. But what are you going to do if that tech is just to help your internal margins and cost structures?
And so the capital costs just didn't have enough time to pay off. I think that's the other part is basically you have all this heavy investment in tech and then when the market's cratered and the market wasn't there anymore, like you had all these high costs of
Exactly.
investment.
Yeah. And then labor was the first thing to go, as you saw the cuts in the team sizes. And if you get in a really bad scenario like Convoy, then you can even just shut the company down.
Right. Because it was like you became a shipping logistics company that just had a whole bunch of capital investment in software, and other shipping logistics companies didn't necessarily have that investment, so they could actually operate more efficiently in some ways, or like without having that either debt or just like overall investment. And so the question is, the tech was good, but how much did it improve things? Like it wasn't enough to make up for how much they had invested.
Yeah. We have this joke at Shipium that is a Amazon joke, which is if you're unprofitable, you can just make it up in volume. And that's a little bit of what was going on, not to call out particular companies over the other, but generally speaking, a lot of these situations have been the tech investments have not actually yielded the cost structures that they needed to be profitable. And so because they're not profitable, they have to continue to invest into the R&D to try to get to those margins and those cost structures that actually are profitable to then scale or grow. And if you're not profitable, it's difficult to make that up in volume because you just become more unprofitable. And that's
Yeah.
where, with the Fed changing the world and money not being free, that's how the musical party stopped.
This is the was the Silicon Valley like pizza delivery joke where they put him out of business by ordering more pizzas. They couldn't keep up. Actually, it's the opposite of that, but I it's funny. Similar idea.
So, what I think is interesting is that the technology that was actually built across all these companies, Flexi, Flexport, Convoy, and many of them are still businesses that have a real shot to come out of the current recession that we're in software and be successful. But a lot of them did incredible work actually transforming the industry. So I think spiritually their mission is accomplished, even if some of the business models have been a bit wonky to fit with the balance sheet and timing and everything else. What Convoy did to trucking is truly extraordinary in terms of the competitors they brought into the market, the vision that they showed the world on how you can innovate with freight. Flexport too, all of the foibles and conflict between Ryan and Dave and everything happened over there. At the end of the day, they have built incredible technology that is truly innovating in the freight forwarding space. And I think it's true in the 3PLs. So when I think about, okay, these investments and the changes and the transformations, this thread of the sweater, if you will, that's been pulled, how does this matter to the future of commerce going forward? I really think what it shows is that software can achieve its promise of innovating, of transforming, and of fundamentally shifting an industry's priors, whether it's their cost structures, the expectations of their customers, whatever the case may be. But it's just the delivery model by which that software is actually consumed that is
Yeah.
now going to potentially be changing and is in question. Because we have these verticalized models like a Flexport or a Convoy that, because of everything we talked about, are struggling. But there's no reason why the actual innovations that they identified and built technology around can't be packaged as different type of software tools that eventually get to the end customer. So let me give you an example that's a little more in kind of our space. The retail industry is also going through a pretty big contraction. So this is separate
Hmm.
from everything we talked about earlier with the logistics companies. But if I just do some cherry picking of headlines, right? So traditional retailers who have laid off engineering staff in 2023, the Container Store, Joanne, Nordstrom, Lululemon, Dick's, REI, Kohl's, all the brand holding companies have had major tech layoffs this year. LVMH, VF, Authentic Brands Group, Ascena, Newell, right? Modern Tech, Direct to Consumer, Zulily, Allbirds, Away Luggage, Glossier, they've all had tech layoffs. Even Walmart and even Amazon, famously, right? Earlier this year,
Hmm.
laid off thousands of tech employees. And what we're seeing is that this general zeitgeist of because money is free, I can then invest this money into things that I think are related to my business. Now that the money's not free, it's the misalignment of it's not actually my revenue or my profits that are powering the investments of what matters to my company. Therefore, these things that don't actually matter to my company are now going away, which includes half of my software engineers or whatever else, because I'm a clothing company. Why am I reinventing the
Yeah.
wheel in software related to supply chain issues or AI chatbots or whatever that we want? It just doesn't make sense. This era of DIY is, in my opinion, starting to go away. And this is what we're seeing. That's the linkage here between a VF Corp and a Convoy. So I think the calculus of software is going to change and is going to become much, much more valuable across all commerce companies, because they're going to look at the unit economics of buying a software subscription to do a thing is so much better than the DIY investments. And I think what's going to happen is you're going to see this kind of knock-on effect of the innovations Convoy had, the innovations Flexport has had, the innovations 3PLs that are doing, whether it's Shipium or other companies that are software centric, are now going to be able to help improve the industry with a lot of their ideas, a lot of their concepts, and just in general help achieve maybe over the next 5 years the impact on the industry that a lot of the tech enabled logistics companies are trying to do.
I think that's really astute. You brought up Glacier. I think that's a great example. They were on, I think, some like modified version of Spree Commerce forever. It was so modified that it might be considered custom at this point. I don't know. And then they've, very publicly made the move to Shopify, which didn't come without criticism for sure. But the amount of investment they had in tech was very high before, almost famously high, maybe like pridefully high. And what I've talked to some of the other uh, brands out there that are becoming more direct to consumer or were early direct to consumer and felt like tech was like a key part of their business, and again maybe a point of pride. And I bring this up because especially with some of these legacy companies that have built up very large tech stacks, a lot of that has to do with like org building. It's politics within a certain org. And you're seeing new leaders come in and be like, we can do most of this with a piece of tech that's way lighter weight. We need half these people or a third of these people to support this kind of innovative tech. I think your point is dead on. And again, I won't give away sources, but I've talked to someone else at a very large brand who came into an org where their direct consumer tech team was like over 100 people, maybe it was like 200 plus people. And he came in and he was like, what is going on? Yes, we are a major brand, but this is direct to consumer that we're talking about right now. This is one, not a major part of our business. Retail is still way bigger. And two, all of this technology you built on is built for something that's significantly more complicated than the set of that we have in a direct to consumer context. And this is just the story that we're seeing across the board. I think so what I think to tie it back to shipping, I think what I hear you saying, and I think this is a really good point, is that maybe tech shouldn't always be verticalized. Like maybe that's a really bad idea unless it's something that's like really cutting edge, where you find like an arbitrage moment where it's like, oh wow, there's not really tech to address this, and we know that there's a lot of people there or whatever, we know we can make money or save money in this way, and there's not really something available to do this for us. Then it might make sense. But for tried and true stuff, it's why not you just use the tech that's available, and instead of trying to mash up things, whether you're a retailer or you're trying to combine like tech plus logistics and 3PL. um,
Yeah.
Maybe let's keep certain components best in breed.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what shakes out. There's the famous quote, I think, from the CEO of Time Warner back in the 90s that there's only two business models, bundling and unbundling. And when it comes to, I think, this logistics space, you went through an era that because of it's all about money. And so because of the way finances worked, for a good decade, bundling stuff into a more verticalized business model to sell on to people made a lot of sense because you could do it. But now that has fundamentally changed. I think there's going to have this knock-on effect that now maybe unbundling is the right type of model. At a macro sense, that's going to happen. But I'm glad you brought up the story because I'll give one more anecdote that you
Okay.
reminded me of. Is I shared more like broad level thoughts of say the next 3 to 5 years. But if you just want to even say January, right?
Yeah.
Like how is this stuff going to impact the future of commerce of Q1? What I can tell you is that Shipium is up to a couple dozen customers now, and well over half have also laid off engineers within their staff. So we've seen it directly with our customers. And there's another organization that I won't give out names to keep the innocent, but they've been looking to work with Shipium all year. They've gone through three major layoffs. So the engineering staff has essentially gone through three different layoffs between January and now. And as a result, the scoping of working with Shipium, getting it implemented with their warehouses, with their carriers, et cetera, has passed from engineering team to engineering team as it's gotten smaller and smaller. And now it's to the point where they have one engineering team left at this company, this retailer. And that one engineering company is left with the entire roadmap that was spec'd out back in January. And they're trying to pick up the pieces and decide a prioritization of what to actually cut as a sunk cost versus what projects will actually have a meaningful impact on the business. Because they only have so many hourly units in their day that they can deploy to do
Right.
some sort of engineering. So now it was basically Shipium and some sort of 3D rendering technology to show a shirt on a Gen AI body was essentially another project that was analogous to us on roadmap that a different team, not at all related to ops tech, was originally trying to do that the now single team is left with. I'm sharing this single anecdote to say that I think this is definitely a prototype for 2024. I think whether you're talking about
Yeah.
a large retailer, Nordstrom or whoever, down to the direct consumers that are 10 years old, have gone through kind of boom and bust like Allbirds, or are brand new like a Caraway that have done the last couple of years post COVID, or really anybody. I think you're looking at a scenario where the structure is strategy, but they let the tail wag the dog. And instead they said, hey, our strategy is our structure, and we're going to build out this huge team,
Yes.
plan this massive roadmap, innovate across all these parts of the business. Now we've contracted down to so many few engineers, so much internal IT is just gone, that there's this reprioritization of what's going to actually matter next year. So the software companies, to bring up the point 10 minutes ago, the software companies that are easy to buy and implement and use can probably pick up a lot of lift next year, because now these teams don't have to necessarily kill a roadmap. They can just say, actually, instead, we're just going to use this module or plugin or
Yep.
whatever. But big stuff like Shipium, the other things like warehouse rollouts or whatever, there's going to be this massive reprioritization culling. I think that's going to happen in Q1 and Q2.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Having worked with different types of retail orgs in the past, like seeing that reprioritization happen is definitely something that I've experienced before. We've been through cycles like this before. The thing that I think has to happen, though, and this is a massive problem, actually, Ingrid Cordy, who's the co-host of Infinite Shelf, a Future Commerce podcast, she's been saying this for years. There needs to be some reorg at the top. Like,
Yeah.
KPIs need to be realigned. Retail businesses still are operating in silos that they've operated in for years and years, and they've added on to those silos, but they haven't completely restructured. And that's a really hard thing to do. I mean, reorging like that is
Yeah.
you have to give up control, probably, of, if you're in a certain role, you might have to give up part of your org, or cut part of your org, or play into other people's priorities. But if someone's not looking at the business holistically, or at least in with a modern lens of how technology is actually going to affect the business at every touch point,
Yeah.
then it's going to get really hard to focus on the things that will make a meaningful difference. And that's the thing that I think is a little scary, is like, when these orgs do get cut down, do you know who gets to pick the projects? The people that are working on them. And whatever they think is the most interesting to them, they'll end up just focusing on that, or whatever they feel like they can accomplish, or that might make their career look the best. They're going to pick those things. It's not going to be, or maybe it's just someone who just takes the reins that doesn't have any larger look at what the business actually needs. And so in the case of your anecdote, it seems like there's a lot of like very off the shelf tools that could get them 90% of what they're looking for on putting a shirt onto an AI generated body. That should be, like you said, like back to your point earlier, there are certain things that should be easy to pick up and just plug in, that are the other, like that last 10% isn't going to be the thing that gets you to saves your retail business. I think you've got to look for the ways to really either stand out or save money, and that's going to take, again, a little bit of a reorg. Yeah. What last thoughts, Kris, on how this is going to shake out before we wrap it up here?
I wouldn't be surprised if a similar kind of fate is going to come to some of these other companies that we talked about. I think they all have a fighter's chance to make it out of this, and we're definitely all pulling for them. But I think any business that has some sort of an operational expense that's not related to software is probably going to have a rough next 12 to 24 months. And I wouldn't be surprised if we continue to hear the kind of stories we've been hearing. And so hopefully the audience has a little bit better perspective on why that's happening. And then we'll just see where we all come out as a community after the fact.
Love it. Thank you, Kris, again for your insights here. This is super. Oh, I feel like I learned a lot, and I'm sure that our audience has as well. Very thankful to have your voice here at Future Commerce, and appreciate your ongoing insights. So,
Always. Thanks again, Brian.